All right, welcome everybody. I hope everybody's getting over their post-Hanukkah blues. Hopefully we can inspire ourselves with some Torah. We are going to have a very freewheeling class today. I know normally we have a very sort of formal setting. I know sometimes people feel stifled by the format and they can't express themselves. So this week, for a complete change of pace, we're going to have sort of a freewheeling discussion. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be asking ourselves one question and trying to give a whole bunch of different answers, see what we like, what maybe some of the weaknesses are in some of those answers, and then we're going to spend some time on the inverse of that question. Before we get started, I do just want to bear in mind, hopefully, as I'm sure many of you are aware, the rabbi of the show, Rabbi Kalimnik, is quite ill at the moment, and so our learning today should be in zechut of him having a refuah shlema. And it's, I think, very beautiful that, here at the physical location of Beth Shalom, we really have the community, various different shuls, all sorts of different walks of life. People can come together to learn Torah, and hopefully that should be a great zechut for the full and speedy recovery of the rabbi.
Amen.
Amen. All right, with that in mind...
Are you allowed to give us an update on what's happening?
I don't have any information to give, but I'm sure there are many people who will be happy to give you all that information when
We've got a big crowd tonight.
To make something up, that's right.
I'm very excited.
Oh my goodness.
All right, so our question today is one that has troubled people for many, many, many years, which is, we're finishing up the Yosef saga, we're finishing up the Yosef story. Parshat Vayigash, Yosef had his dreams a couple of weeks ago. Yosef has made his dreams come true, right? Everything has gone according to the great prophecy, assuming the dreams are a prophecy, which it certainly seems that they are some element of prophecy at least. Although, Yosef is really the first since Abraham's time, right? We've got Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and then Yaakov's children, and the most time is spent with Yosef. God speaks directly with Avram, God speaks directly with Yitzchak, God speaks directly with Yaakov. God never speaks directly with Yosef. There's no Vayidaber Hashem el Yosef, Vayidaber Hashem el Yehuda, Vayidaber Hashem el Reuven. We never have that direct conversation. The closest we get is Yosef's dreams and his dream interpretational ability, which Yosef assures people repeatedly, comes from God. He certainly feels a divine connection there. But, the Yosef saga is largely over. There's still elements to be discussed in Vayechi, particularly about the relationship between the brothers especially after Yaakov passes on, sort of how do you patch everything up. But our saga has, for the most part, come to a conclusion. And the question is, why is it, if Yosef has been separated from his father for all these decades, and for so much of that time, at least 9 years, he has been second in command only to Paro, an extremely powerful person in Paro's house. Why doesn't he phone home, Why doesn't he? You've got to call your parents, You're a nice Jewish boy. What kind of a nice Jewish boy doesn't call his parents?
At least on a postcard.
So exactly, So why, his poor father is in mourning. He's certain that his son has died. And Yosef does nothing to correct this misconception of Yaakov's. To the point where some of the Rishonim, some of the Parshanim, classic Parshanim, such as Ramban and Abar use very strong language. They say this is cruelty, Who could do such a thing to a bereaved father, to not let them know about their status, that they're fine, that everything turned out okay, even better than okay in some respects. So, before we start getting into what some of the earlier Parshanim would say, straight up to the modern day, since this is a topic of much conversation, even among modern scholars, modern rabbis, let's just open it up, What does everybody here think? Anybody have any thoughts on the subject? Anybody thought about this before? Anybody thinking about it now for the first time? What do people think? Tamarius.
It was supposed to be like a prophecy. It was done deliberately, so eventually his father and brothers will come.
Beautiful. So that is classic answer to Parshanim. That's Ramban, basically Rashi, classic Parshanim. They say, it's all about the prophecy, it's all about the dreams. Yosef had these dreams had to come true, and it was basically everything that was done was because the dreams needed to be fulfilled. Just to remind us, what were these dreams? Anybody remember what the dreams actually were?
Oh, yeah,
the 11 stars in the sky, the sun, the moon, the sky bowing down before him.
Yes, and
And
there's a
the
second dream.
field
The
of
sheaves.
corn, and 11 sheaves bow down to his sheep.
It's not necessarily 11 sheaves, it's the brothers' sheaves. Whether it's 10 or 11, I know, it's a little bit unclear. But certainly the brothers' sheaves all bowing down to... Right, bowing down
to his one
to Yosef's sheep. Yes, okay, so those are Yosef's dreams, right? Yosef needs to find a way to make them come true. And so, right, he's looking for his opportunity. So before we go on to other people's opinions...
That's it, the lesson ended.
I'm sorry?
The lesson
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Tamar. We're all good. We'll see you next week. Does anybody have any objections, any problems, any issues?
Well, when
One, two. No, doctor, go ahead, and then, or doctor, then doctor.
Which doctor? The witch doctor.
The witch doctor.
Please.
well,
doctor.
when the brothers come to Joseph, the first question he asks is my father still alive? Now, he was, yeah.
When Yosef reveals his true identity, he says, "Is my yes, Haud Avichai."
Yes.
Okay.
So clearly he had doubts. Jacob was very old when he was kidnapped. He was 12 years in prison. He probably assumed Jacob had died by then, which would be a legitimate assumption given Jacob's age. And therefore, if he sent to inquire about it, the brothers would know that he was there. And he was not very happy with the brothers. The last he had seen of them was that they were talking about killing him, or maybe we just leave him in the pit and let him die of thirst. So he was pretty ticked off at the brothers.
Okay, I think that's a separate answer. We can go into separate answers in a minute. Right now, the plan's to deal with them one at a time. Let's start with this one. We're starting with this answer. We can go to you afterwards. Right now, Tamara's put forward classical answer. Yosef is waiting for the dreams to come true. Does anybody have any problem or objection with that answer?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Actually, I think Rabbi Riskin brought this up. Sheep tying is something settled people do, not nomads. How does he know about harvesting wheat and sheep tying? How do they all know about that?
Well, okay. Are they nomads?
Sheep tying. Well, yeah. In fact, when they go to Egypt, they say, Anu go'im.
Well, when they go to Egypt, that's true. But my question is, at the time when Yosef is following them, are they nomads? Are they living in an ohel, or are they living in a bayit?
They're living in,
And the Torah is pretty clear about
They're
that.
living in a house.
They are living in a
not
house.
Nomads. They are not nomads.
They ain't no nomads. They got themselves a house. So I'm not sure about that, right? It's interesting, right? And even so, right? I'm not sure just because, even if they are nomadic, obviously the vast majority of the brothers are spending the vast majority of their time shepherding. That doesn't mean they won't know anything about farming. It's not like they wouldn't have heard of it potentially. But does anybody else have any objections, right? Yosef wants the dreams to come true, so that's why he doesn't tell his father.
Well, his mother's died.
His mother's died, that's true.
The moon bowing down, if you assume sun and moon mean father and mother.
So that's a separate question, which is what on earth is going on with the second dream, right? The sun and the moon are going to bow down to him, and Yaakov says, am I going to bow down to you? Is your mother, who's now deceased, is going to come bow down to you? Right? And it says, Vaviv shamar et hadavar, which is very ambiguous. It says his father guarded or kept the matter, and there's a division, right? Does this mean he was happy and excited, like that some great thing is going to happen, or does that mean he's upset? Like, why are you saying this thing, right, about your mother who's already passed on, or this seems very haughty, something along those lines. But in terms of the classical approach, right, first of all, right, it's awful long term, right? Basically, for over 20 years, close to 22 years, Yosef doesn't say anything to his father in the expectation that his dreams are going to come true as he interprets them. Second of all, right, this seems like an awful, mean thing to do to your father, right, because you believe there's some sort of higher plan here. But also, right, we've got another problem, which is, what is Yosef's general attitude towards the dreams and towards everything that happened back in his father's house? When he's in Egypt, what's his attitude towards it? Well, let's turn to page 230 to find out. Who wants to read from verse 50 through verse 52? Oh, please, Doctor.
So verse 50. So
50 to 52.
now to Yosef were born two sons, when the year of famine had not yet set in, whom Asenath, daughter of Potiphar, chief of On, bore to him. Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh, for God had made me forget all my hardship and all my father's household. And the name of the second he called Ephraim, for God had made me fruitful in the land of my suffering.
Okay, so, right, he marries Asnat bat Potiphera. Potiphera may or may not be Potiphar. Again, a lot of these things get very jumbled and confusing, right? Especially in the Yosef story, you've got a lot of words that sound familiar that may or may not be the same thing, right? He's sold to Midianites and Medanites, and are they the same people? Are they different people? After all, it sounds very similar. On the other hand, Midian, the historical character of Midian, has a brother named Medan, so maybe they're different people, right? So this is one of those examples, right? You have Potiphar and you have Potiphera. Are they the same person? Are they different people? We don't know. But, right, what's going on is he names his Bechor Menashe, right? Because Ki Nashani Elohim et Kol Amali et Kol Beit Avi, because I've forgotten, Hashem has helped me to forget my suffering and my father's house. It's unclear whether it means forget all of my father's house or the suffering of my father's house. That's a debate that we'll get into in a bit. But, and then the second one he calls Ephraim, because God has caused me to prosper here in the land where I suffered, where I was brought down as a slave, and now, look at me, I'm second in command to Paro. Does this indicate somebody who's clinging to the past and waiting for the dreams to come true? Right? Not only that, when Yosef sees the brothers, what does it say? Yosef sees the brothers, and he remembers the dreams. Right? Vayiskor Yosef atachalamot asher lachalam lahem. Yosef remembers the dreams. What's the implication? He'd forgotten about them prior to this, and this sort of jogged his memory. So to go around saying that Yosef really had this long, elaborate plan, and that was dictating his actions, maybe, but there's some textual indication that's not the case. So we have one answer. Maybe people like it. Maybe people have some objections to it. But let's toss around some other answers. What other reasons might we think of as to why Yosef might not tell his father?
Maybe just technically he didn't have access to a cell phone.
Oh, beautiful, right? Maybe he just couldn't do it, right? Maybe he just couldn't do it. So let's examine that.
He was in prison for a long time.
So he comes down, he's a slave, right? Presumably when he's a slave, he can't go and tell his father. What happens? He rises to be a very important person in the house of Potiphar, to the point where he says, and is uncontradicted when he says, right, I have access to everything in my master's household except my master's wife. Right.
My master's wife. Yeah.
Right. Except for that, I have access to everything. Yes, Zippy.
Maybe he was afraid that if he let it be known that he had family, they would be in danger.
The family would be in danger from Potiphar?
From people who didn't like Yosef.
Well, at this point, he's apparently a well-liked slave in Potiphar's house. Do we have any reason to think people wouldn't like him? Do we know of anyone who doesn't like him? Does he have any enemies that we're aware of?
We don't know.
Potiphar's wife.
Possibility.
So we don't know. So maybe, I mean, at this
Put him in jail. He can't really trust anybody.
But at this point, right, before the incident with Potiphar's wife, right, before that happens, does Potiphar's wife like him or not like him? She really likes him, right?
Clearly likes him.
Right? She likes him, right? So what's going on is it's possible, but maybe we could say, right, if you want to say this answer, how would we say it? Well, maybe he's a very important person in Potiphar's house, but what wouldn't he potentially be allowed to do? Start sending messages to his family back in Canaan. Why not? Because he may be a very high-ranking slave, but he's still a slave. And slaves aren't allowed to escape. That's a really big no-no. And if you start communicating with your family on the outside, what maybe, right, again, we don't know for sure, but what might this be interpreted as?
Escape.
Right, as some sort of rebellious activity, and Yosef doesn't want to, and Yosef isn't allowed to do it, and Yosef doesn't want to risk it because he doesn't know.
Rock the boat.
Right, he doesn't know what's going to happen of it. After that, he becomes a slave again, right? Or he becomes back in prison. Again, while he's in prison, he can't send out messages, obviously. Then he becomes second in command to Paro. Why, maybe, would you not be allowed to send messages when you're second in command to Paro?
Okay, I have a
Security
different
risk?
slant.
Oh, we'll get to your slant in just a second. Wait, if you're second in command to Paro, why can't you send messages to Canaan?
Well,
Security
he's
risk.
getting a lot, he's getting wonderful treatment in Egypt. He wasn't treated so well back home.
I think you could certainly argue that. Maybe you could argue, or and again, you see it from the names of his kids. Things back home weren't so good, and now things are better, right? Like, he's living a pretty sweet life. Why does he want to rock the boat? And also, like, he's been out of the game for over a decade, right? Maybe he just, it's over, right? That's just not his identity anymore. This is his new identity.
Especially since the Egyptian attitude toward the Hebrews is very clear. The Egyptians won't eat with the Hebrews. They don't eat at the same table. They're considered low Bedouin.
The Ivrim. The Ivrim.
They had Ivrim there.
Yes, they have Ivrim, and it specifically says, right, that the kilo yuchlu hamitzrim lachot harim lachem ki toeva hamitzrayim, right? The first act of anti-Semitism recorded in history, right? Yes, in Parsha Miketz, right? It says the Egyptians refused to break bread with the Hebrews because they were an inferior people. It was an abomination to the Egyptians.
Set up 3 tables.
Right.
For the Egyptians, the table for Joseph's brothers, because he was Hebrews and the Egyptians wouldn't eat with them, and a table for Pharaoh, for Joseph, because he was too high to eat with the regular Egyptians, and he certainly wouldn't eat with the Hebrews.
And it says,
So
right,
it
explicitly says that in the text, right, everybody was eating by themselves for exactly, right, separately for exactly this reason. So you can say, look, he's carved out a new identity. He has a new name. He literally has a new name. He's got wife, he's got kids, he's got rank. Maybe he just doesn't want to go back to that old life. Some doors are better left unopened. Okay, before we go on to other answers, does anybody have any problem with that?
Yeah, I do, actually.
Okay, sure. Don't be afraid to criticize, right?
He
Come on, they're good Jews, come on.
He still thinks of himself as being part of his brotherhood because he still feels very strong ties to Hashem. So clearly he can't forget his past.
Okay. You got to
not
back that up.
who
You
he
can't
is.
just say
It's not
something
who
like
he
that.
is.
Give me some text here. He feels, I'm not arguing with you, I'm just saying you got to prove it.
Well, when he becomes
favor.
warden, he rises to power in the prison, and he tells the butler and the cupbearer, that let me help you with your dreams, and with these dreams, with the help of Hashem, I will help you interpret these dreams.
Beautiful. Does he do that ever again, or is that the last time he invokes Hashem?
No. When he tells
Why
Paro,
did he
he tells
interpret
Paro the
Paro's
same thing.
dream?
It's God, not me.
Exactly, right. Certainly
And
Yosef has a strong
maybe
connection with Hashem.
Paro,
What else, right, along those lines, right? If Yosef really didn't want a connection with his father and with his brothers, what could he very easily have done when his brothers came and did not recognize him?
Ignore him.
Absolutely nothing. Right? He could have done absolutely nothing. And what would have happened? They would have bought their food, and they would have left. And he would have gone on being, right, he would have gone on being called Arich, and he would have been Tzafnat Paneach, and everybody would be happy, and none of this, right, would have ever occurred, right? None of our story would have occurred. Rather, Yosef remembers the dreams, he engages with his brother, he puts all these plans in motion to ultimately affect a reconciliation. So to just go around saying, he sort of bailed on them, maybe, right? It could be that until he actually saw his brothers, he didn't realize how much he missed them. You could argue that. Also, factually, it's not so clear, right? To go around saying, right, when he was second in command to Potiphar, right, he wasn't allowed to send a message to his family. It would have been an act of rebellion. There's no way for him to do it secretly, right? Yosef is a very smart guy. is no. I mean, maybe he didn't want to risk it. Maybe it was too dangerous. Maybe. But I don't know how happy we are with that answer. But again, right, if you're liking it, all right, there's textual proof to suggest that that's a correct or viable answer. Anybody else got any other approaches?
I just want to comment a little bit on that. When he sees his brothers, his actions, it seems to me, are testing them before he would reveal himself. So he feels that, he recalls the dreams, he recalls his past, he knows what's happened. He's not so sure he could trust his brothers.
I think that is definitely true. I think he definitely causes them to jump through a few hoops, and we are going to talk about those hoops in a little bit. You ask why would he need to trust them? I think that's a good question, right? Clearly, he's forcing them to establish something. What he's forcing them to establish, we can discuss. We'll get to that in a moment. But does anybody else have any other approaches? Right? We're all very, very, doctor?
Well, I said before, and then I repeat it again, it's very interesting. The very first thing he says to the brothers is my father still alive?
Yes.
Wait a minute,
And-
before that,
What? Hang on, let me finish.
I know.
What he's revealed is my father still alive. Jacob was an old man when he was kidnapped. He spent 12 years in prison, right? Another few years being second in command to Pharaoh. 18 years, 17 years have gone by since he saw his father. He has every reason to think the father's dead.
Possibly, except there's two problems with that. Anybody want to take a stab on what the... Take a stab. I think he might be dead. Why there's a problem with that,
Because when the
potentially?
brothers come, they tell him he's alive.
The brothers have already said explicitly,
He's
right,
alive.
that their father's alive. Repeatedly in their conversations before this. They've said it
They
repeatedly.
might be trying
And
to get his sympathy.
second, which may explain why Yosef actually says, can my father, right? It's possible he's really looking to confirm them. He's like, look, you don't need give me your BS story anymore. Come on, tell me the truth.
I don't think they say the father's alive. They say
Oh, yeah, no.
we are 11
son.
brothers
They say-
of one father. But they don't
No, and they say, right, they say our father doesn't want to release the son, right? They say
Yeah.
our brother is at home
It
with
would
our
kill him.
father.
Yeah, right. It'll kill him if
I
you
mean,
don't come.
maybe you could interpret that to mean he's like crying over the
Yeah.
grave, but like I think the shot explanation is he's home being taken care of by the father. And the second issue is when Yosef first rises to power, certainly in the house of Potiphar, it's only a couple of years after. We don't know that for sure, by the way. We don't know how long he spends in the house of Potiphar. We don't know the timeline for a lot of things because we don't know how long it was between when we know he's kidnapped at the age of 17 or he's sold into slavery at the age of 17, and we know that he stands before Paro at the age of 30. We don't know how long everything else took. Presumably, right, and you have Midrashim suggesting, oh, he was bouncing around from this people to that people before he finally gets sold to Potiphar is a very, very long time. And you can understand why those Midrashim are saying what they're saying, right? Why are those Midrashim saying that? Well, it comes to solve two problems. Again, textually, these Midrashim are beautiful, right? The pshat is, of course, he gets taken down to Egypt, there's a slave market, he gets sold as a slave and spends the vast majority of his time as a slave in the house of Potiphar. The Midrashim say, no, he's bouncing around here, there, and everywhere. Two reasons. Textually, it solves two big problems. The first of which is, why is it you've got the Midanim and the Midyanim and the Yishmaelim and all these different nations and characters jumping around? Second of all, if he's spending all this time as a big important person in the house of Potiphar, why doesn't he contact his father? Great, both answers are solved. Really, the reason why all these nations are mentioned is because he's bouncing around like a bad penny from here to there to there. He finally winds up at the house of Potiphar, and that entire incident is very short-lived, right? Midrashically, right? Midrashically, you understand why it's coming to answer that. But on a pshat level, right? On a pshat level, he's a high-ranking person in the house of Potiphar a few years after he got sold. There's no reason for him to necessarily believe that anything terribly tragic had happened to his father. Okay, we're all very frum religious people here. Can anybody give me a very frum religious answer, right? Everybody here is very stark. I can tell everybody has a beautiful neshama, right? Neshama tahora, right? Who can give me a very beautiful frum answer? Why is it that Yosef doesn't reach out and do anything and say anything? Because
God tells him not to.
Not because God tells him not to per se, but I think very close along those lines.
He has faith in God.
He has faith in God. Right. Right. What do we do? Right. especially in relation to the dreams, right? He has these divine dreams, so, of course, right? God is going to take care of it. God is going to take care of it. You don't take care of it. Where do you see, a little bit ironically, both a support and a rebuttal to this argument? Something that Yosef does, implying that it isn't just relying on God to take care of everything.
When he asks the cupbearer, when he goes to Paro, say, like, remind Paro about me.
Beautiful, right? So what happens? He interprets the dreams of the butler and the baker, and the butler is returned to his post, and the baker is returned on the post. And what happens? Right, postage due, I don't know.
The baker gets hung.
Hanged. I mean, also hung.
Hanged.
Well, also hung. Both.
On a picture, hanged.
Yes, I'm saying he gets both. He is both. The truth of the matter is, right?
He is hung up on a tree.
Biblically
and
speaking,
hanged.
just so people should be aware, biblically speaking, whether we're talking about this story or whether we're talking about where else is hanging, very important element of the story. Purim, right? And again, huge amounts of overlap between the three major Gulla stories in Tanakh, right? We have three major stories, three major characters of the Jew in the foreign king's court, right? As our sort of our ideal role models for how to function in Galut, right? Who are our three major characters?
Mordechai.
Yosef.
Daniel.
And Daniel, exactly.
And
Huge
Daniel.
amounts of overlap between these stories. When you have the phrase Tala, right? Talu, Al Ha'itz, right? They hanged him, whatever it is, on the tree. What does it mean, right? Does it mean they put him to the gallows and he was hung by the neck until dead?
Or impaled.
It means that they were impaled, exactly, right?
What?
Yes, that's what it means. Al Ha'itz, right? They were impaled on the tree, on the piece of wood, right?
A very sharp piece of wood.
Exactly. In order to, right, send a message far and wide, right? This is what happens.
Like on sticks or something?
Yes, or not just their heads, the rest of them too. So, right,
Could that refer to crucifixion too?
I've never actually seen that. It might, I don't know, but I've never actually seen
I
that.
mean, that's impalement.
So
No,
Robespierre.
It is impalement of a kind. I haven't seen that anywhere, and I don't know when that was first practiced. I don't think the Romans invented it, but I don't know the history of it or how far back it goes. So, right, so what do we have, right?
The great French king also just like impaled them on the tower of whatever.
Well, the Mongols were
British.
the ones who were known.
Yeah.
Okay, so right.
The
Who had to
victims
go get the
on,
bodies
yeah.
that were impaled on the
They
wall.
didn't necessarily. They might have just left them there.
Well, the implication is you'll be left for the birds and the animals to, right?
Right.
And that's why, by the way, what law do we have in Judaism to specifically counteract this? Because this was...
You're going to be buried.
I think it was
Even somebody who has committed a horrible crime and is sentenced to death,
You have to take them down and
they have to be taken down and buried, right? Even if you're going to impale them, right? Even if you're going to, after they've received whatever halachic death sentence, if they're going to be displayed as, to keep the people in line, they still get a decent burial. Okay.
Sorry.
But, so, what happens, what does Yosef say to the cupbearer, right, to the butler? What does he say?
Remember me to Paro.
Remember me to Paro, right? Tell Paro there's this innocent man who, by the way, is also very useful, has various skills. What happens? Hang on a second, Tamar. What happens?
He forgets.
Nothing.
He forgets.
He forgets.
So that's a strong implication that Yosef is not just sort of standing around, right? What's interesting is a couple of Parshanim sort of take him to task for this and say, he wasn't supposed to do this. He was supposed to rely on the divine will, right? And that's why he winds up hanging around for 2 more years in prison, because he was relying on the butler and not relying on God. Anybody kind of got a problem with that from a philosophical standpoint?
In some canonies.
I think that's a pretty fair statement, right? If you, tomorrow morning, God forbid, were convicted of a crime you didn't commit and hailed off to jail, do you think, right, and you went to your rabbi and you said, Rabbi, I'd like to file an appeal. How many people think their rabbi would say, no, you don't file an appeal, you rely on God, right? We have many people in this room with many different rabbis and many different approaches to life, but I don't think anybody here has a spiritual leader who would tell them that. No, of course you file an appeal, right? You're innocent, you didn't commit the crime, you shouldn't have been found guilty, of course you should file an appeal. Yosef doesn't, there's no appellate process, right? It's a monarchy, divine right of kings. The king snaps his fingers and says, you're guilty, your head gets chopped off and you're on a pike. The king snaps his fingers and says, you're innocent, then you're let out of jail and returned to a high position. So in this case, right, the appeal is to get the ear of the king. That's the way it works. And that's the way it worked for many years, many centuries in millennium human history. So, what do we have, right? I'm not so sure we can go with our super duper frum approach of just Yosef didn't communicate with anybody because he was just sitting back and waiting for God to take care of it. Plus, it's very much at odds with this idea of naming the kids, God made me forget, and all the suffering, and then he remembers the dreams, like, as opposed to, he was excited that finally the divine plan had sprung into action. It seems he's more remembering and sort of dusting off the cobwebs in the back of his brain. Yes?
I think life just got in the way. That's what he was doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that goes back to sort of he's got a new identity now, right? He was a slave, right? He was in the pit. He was a slave and he rose up to be an important person. He was down in the pit and he's back up. He's a new important person. He has at this point, remember, how long has he spent away from the family when the brothers show up? Right, 22 years. How old was he when he's first sold into slavery? 17. He has spent more time away from the family than with the family. He spent more time in Egypt than in Canaan. Right? We shouldn't necessarily just discount this fact. Okay. A couple of other approaches. Yes, Doctor.
Isn't there something in this process, I'm not exactly sure if I remember correctly, but there's something along the lines of his father somehow knew that Yosef was still alive. And there was some sort of...
There's no indication of that. So it's very... This is a very interesting philosophical approach that basically says, right, it says Yaakov was mourning for Yosef the entire time. What happens over the normal course of events, right? When somebody passes away, you're very sad, and you mourn for them, and eventually, right, time goes on, and you move on with your life. But Yaakov never got up from mourning, so he never got off this feeling of loss, and he realized it must be, why is it that he was never able to stop mourning the separation from Yosef? If Yosef had died, after a certain period of time, he should be able to move on, but he couldn't move on. Okay, right, therefore... but that's a very sort of philosophical approach. I don't think there's anything in the text indicating that...
here's my other question. Why would Yaakov say, go to Yosef, there's a famine here, go to Yosef and get the food?
But he doesn't say Yosef. He says, go to the Egyptian man.
Go to Egypt.
Right? He says, go to the important...
So in page 231, when all of the land of Egypt hungered and people cried out to Pharaoh for bread...
Right, right, so they go to Paro.
Yosef, whatever he tells you,
right.
You should do.
The Egyptians go to Paro and say, we're hungry. And Paro says, I've got a secretary in charge of food distribution.
Oh, okay.
Right?
So you're talking about the Egyptians.
Right, now it's interesting that Paro calls him Yosef and not Avrech, Atzaf, not Paneach, or anything like that. But Yaakov never calls him Yosef, he calls him the Egyptian man.
Got it.
But I thought Yaakov knows the future. I mean, in his blessings at the end, he knows the future. So how can you know the future, special man, and not have some sense of all the pieces that are out there?
Oh, okay. Well, I actually think I'm taking that. Taking that actually quite seriously, right? I think the phrase that you're using is actually very important, right? Pieces, right? Because they know pieces of the future in the sense that there's a prophecy.
There's prophecy
about, right? There's a prophecy. There's the dreams that Yosef had. There's the prophecy in terms of Brit Bein Abitarim, that they would go into a foreign nation and they would be enslaved to them. And they know that all these elements are coming together, right? They have these, or they have faith, they have belief, right? This comes directly from God. So Yaakov knows pieces of the puzzle, but he doesn't necessarily know all the pieces. And also, right, there are signs and omens that sometimes don't come true at all, and sometimes they come true in very unexpected ways.
And also, if we think, not that I know we should use text, but if we just move aside just a little and look at the reasons why the brothers hated him, he was a very self-absorbed, not reaching out to the family kind of guy. It was all about him.
If anything, it was reaching out to the family a little too much, but okay.
Well, but he was really thinking only about himself and about Even in the prophecy, it was all about him. And so why should he suddenly want to make contact again? It wasn't in character for him to do that.
So maybe, but here's the thing. Again, we got to remember, right? When all this stuff is going on with the dreams and Yosef being self-absorbed, he's 17, right? I think everybody
so he never
here.
got beyond that, though. A 17-year-old doesn't come home.
So pretty
right?
egocentric.
Right, so I think everybody right here, a lot of people here know, right, that kid who was like a complete jerk in high school, and then like a couple of decades later, you go to the high school reunion, and they're like a nice, decent, well-adjusted person, right? They're not a sociopath, right? They were just a jerk in high school. Some people are jerks in high school.
You can't diagnose someone as a sociopath until they're 18 because before that, pretty much everybody profiles as a sociopath.
Well, okay then, that wasn't depressing at all. Right?
Well, that's psychology.
But basically the idea being, right, the idea being that, right, I think that's fair, and it could be that, or again, sort of going back to this thing that he had this bad experience and he never got a chance to move on. It's possible, but everybody sort of moves on and everybody has their arc, right? We certainly follow Yosef's arc and his experiences, and we see the kind of person he turns into as he gets older. We follow Yehuda's arc. We see the kind of person he turns into. To a certain extent, we see Reuven, Shimon, Levi's arc, to a lesser extent, I think, but to a certain extent. So we're going to do a couple more approaches, and then we're going to ask the inverse of this question.
One more thing. Yosef, when he is on the floor with his brothers and he identifies himself to his brothers, he actually sends the servants out.
Yes.
So that kind of tells me also that if he revealed himself to his brothers in any way, sending a messenger, doing the usual way of trying to, maybe at that time, to identify, hey guys, I'm still alive, just so you know, I'm over here in Egypt and everything is fine and dandy, it's a lot more challenging than you would think.
So it might be that it was just...
He's afraid to let the servants know that he's their brother.
It might just be, right, it could be that there's a psychological block there. It certainly is possible, right? But what right now we're going to look at, right, there was a exchange, to some degree, heated exchange that occurred a few years back in Yeshivat Har Etzion, starting with an article that was published by Rav Yoel ben Nun. Rav Yoel ben Nun is a major Talmid Chacham, particularly with contributions to scholarship in Tanakh.
Any relationship to
I'm sorry.
Any relationship to Yehoshua?
Ben Nun?
Yes, Ben Nun.
I mean, genetically, we're probably all, you go that far back, I assume. So he wrote an article with a fascinating premise. And he argued, right, what do we all know? We all know that Yosef gets thrown into a pit, and the brothers...
I'm sorry, he has...
We all know that Yosef gets thrown into a pit.
Right.
The brothers take his coat, and after he's sold into slavery, the brothers dip the coat in blood, and they bring it to the father, and Yaakov says, oh, Taraf Yosef, right, he's been torn by a wild animal, Yosef is dead, and he sits down and he mourns, right, and you know that, and I know that, but who doesn't know that?
Yosef.
Well, Yosef doesn't know that.
Oh, yeah.
Right, Yosef doesn't know that. Yaakov,
He doesn't want to reveal the brothers to their father.
Wait
a minute.
Oh, okay, so we'll get to that in a minute. I think that's a very interesting approach. We'll get to that in a minute. Before we get to that approach, so we all know that Yaakov is mourning for Yosef. Yaakov knows it. The brothers know it. But Yosef doesn't know it. All Yosef knows is he's got thrown into a pit by the brothers. He got sold into slavery. What would you expect would then happen next from his loving, caring, doting father who has shown great favoritism to him? Surely, what would his father do? Search far and wide, right? It's not, right, it wouldn't be that difficult to track him down, right? He's a, Hebrew servant, right? It's not like, today where there's airplanes and trucks and things going, right? There's caravans coming. They come from time to time. It's not, it's not a everyday circumstance. With enough investigation and enough time, enough money, you would expect he would be able to figure out what happened to Yosef.
But he thought he was dead. I mean,
But Yosef doesn't know that. Right? Yosef doesn't know that. Yosef just knows he's waiting and he's waiting and he's waiting for his father to come and rescue him, and the rescue never comes. So, suggests Rabbi Nun, what conclusion does Yosef reach?
His family doesn't care about him.
His father abandoned him. Right? Why? Why would he think his father would abandon him? Not just that no rescue took place. There's other factors involved. Right? When Yaakov at last left Yosef, right? What was their last exchange before he sends him, right? Before Yaakov sends Yosef off to the brothers, what was their last exchange? Was Yaakov enthralled with what Yosef had to say? No, right? Yosef starts talking about this dream, implying that Yaakov is going to bow down to him, right? Vayigar bo, right? Yaakov isn't so happy about this. Shamar hadavar. Then he sends Yosef off to Shechem, okay, all alone to Shechem. And what happens, right? He winds up in Dotan, and this terrible thing happens. Right, what might Yosef have thought?
he was getting rid of, really getting rid of him.
Right, Yosef thinks, I crossed the line, and my father, two possibilities, right? One is, my father is angry at me and wants to teach me a lesson. The other possibility is, even if my father still loves me, right, do we have any biblical precedent for fathers who love sons but don't necessarily get to spend a lot of time with them? Of course. For example, Ishmael, right? Avram loves the Ishmael. But what happens? God says, he's got to go. In fact, specifically, where does Ishmael have to go?
Far away.
To what land? To the land of?
Egypt.
The land of Egypt, right? Ishmael winds up in Egypt, right? Similarly, Esav is not so much kicked out, but there's a chosen and a non-chosen, and Esav isn't chosen, and he winds up outside of Canaan. He winds up in Seir, right? So, Yosef reasonably thought his father isn't coming to rescue him. It must be because that's what he wanted. He wanted him to be out of the equation. And he says this comes and answers a very important question for us, which is, why is it that ultimately Yosef reveals his true identity to the brothers, right? When could Yosef have done it, right? Any point along the line. He sees the brothers, he could have done it then. Then he does this whole thing where he takes away Shimon, and the brothers say, "Oh, this is our fault because we didn't listen to our brother's cries at the pit." He could have done it then. Then they go away. They come back with Binyamin. He could have done it then, right? Then he puts the cup in the sack, and he sends his men after them to arrest them, and he wants to know, right, are they going to abandon Binyamin to his fate, or are they going to come back and try and defend Binyamin? They come back and they say, "We are slaves to you." He could have done it then, but no. Right? When does he do it? Yehuda approaches, right? Vayigash elav Yehuda. He gives this impassioned speech, giving the whole history, and what does Yehuda say in his speech? He says, "We had a brother, but he was torn to bits, and our father's been crying ever since because he's been, And Yosef says, "Oh, that's what happened. I wasn't abandoned, I wasn't kicked out, there wasn't some divine decree, right? This is some Shakespearean tragedy, right? Where there was a tragedy of errors, I don't know what you want to call it, but basically there was this miscommunication. It's not really miscommunication. There was a deception here, but okay. The nature of the deception is not clear from Yehuda's speech. He doesn't say, "And then we took his coat, we dipped it in blood, and we tricked our..." All right, he doesn't say that. But still, Yosef realizes that the reason why his father hasn't been looking for him is because his father believed he was dead. That solves everything. Yes. Do we have any problems with that? So first we get to Mar's question, then we get any objections.
He assumes that his father knows that he got lost and didn't meet the brothers. He assumes that.
Right.
Why does he want him to go and search for him? Send another brother to search for him. Send all the brothers to search for him.
That's a very good question, and that's what we're going to get to when we finish this question. That's our next question. Okay.
But why don't you think that perhaps Yosef wanted to bring his brothers up to that point where they're doing some sort of kapara? He really wanted, and that's what this whole story is about, forgiveness and...
Oh, beautiful, right? That is exactly where we're going next, right? I think what you said, what Naomi said, are very strongly related, and we're gonna touch on that in 1 second. But before we can get to another answer, does anybody have any problems with this answer? Yes?
Yosef didn't experience the whole blood thing, so how did he, that doesn't quite fit with.
Well, Yosef, that's the point. Yosef doesn't know. Yosef has no reason to know or to think that his father would believe he was dead. Why should his father think he was dead? There's obviously no body, right? So.
But then when the brothers say, do it sort of without saying we did it, and
right.
Then, it's very strange, it seems to me.
But the question is, why didn't he call home during this time span? Now you're fast forwarding to the end, trying to answer the question of.
Right, and basically, and so Ben Nun's answer is, well, obviously when he starts out, right, he's in slavery, he's being brought down to Egypt, he starts out very low in Potiphar's house, he can't send a message at this point, right? And by the time he's in a position to send the message, years have gone by, and no rescue has come, and no attempted rescue has come. And, Yosef's keeping his ear to the ground to see, are there Canaanites, are there people from my father's house, is anybody making inquiries, right? Nothing. Right, so what conclusion has he reached? Suggests with Ben Nun, he comes to the conclusion he's been abandoned. So it may well be 3-4 years into the process, he's an important person in Potiphar's house, he could send a message back, but he's not going to because he's been kicked out, right? It's inappropriate for him to send the message.
And this is a conclusion he's come to after a year.
Exactly.
All right.
So his father deliberately sent him out to get lost?
So I would say that's the main, to my mind, that's the main objection, right? There's a couple of objections.
I'm sorry, what did you?
So, to my mind, the main objection is, right, in order for this to be true, in order for this to be, okay, Yaakov had kicked him out of the house, right? Maybe Yaakov had ordered the brothers to dispatch with Yosef, right, to make sure he goes elsewhere, right? What happens? Yaakov sends Yosef to Shechem. What's the problem?
Not a good place, Shechem.
First of all, not a good place, but what's the other problem? The brothers
didn't go to Shechem.
And in Shechem, right? What should have happened by all rights? Yosef should have turned around and gone home. Except, what happens? There's this Ish. Right? And it's not that Yosef approaches this Ish and says, hey, have you seen my brothers? The Ish approaches him and says, what do you seek? And he says, I seek my brothers. And what do you know? This Ish, who happens to be in this random field outside of Shechem, happens to know they went that way to Dotan. And so Yosef is able to go to Dotan. Right? That's a very weird plan for Yaakov to put in motion. Right? Send him to the wrong place, bump into somebody who knows what's going on, that person will send you to the right place, and then they'll sell you into slavery.
Well, maybe it was the right place when the brothers set out, and then they changed the direction, so Yaakov sent them to where he thought they were.
Right, clearly that is what happened, but the point is, if the whole plan was send them away and have Yosef follow them so Yosef can be kicked out of the family because he's crossed this line, it's a very convoluted way of doing it.
He didn't send them to kick him out. He sent them to check on his brother.
But the point is, if Yosef is reaching the conclusion his father abandoned him, then he's presumably reaching the conclusion that was the purpose of the journey.
It doesn't
It
make
would
sense.
also be weird if the dreams were completely superfluous.
Maybe, right, especially since he is a dream expert, right, maybe. But you could always give different interpretations for dreams and what they mean, especially when he becomes the head of the second in command to Paro, the head of all the grain. So what happens, right? He sees that he's in charge of, right, the sun and the moon. Maybe they mean Egypt and Canaan, and they're bowing down to him. And the brothers the brothers bow down to him. They don't know he's Yosef, but it never says these are sentient sheaves of wheat who know it's Yosef, right? It's just, that's what's going to happen, and lo, that is what has come to pass. So, we don't just have to balance dreams, but there's another problem, which is, right, even if you want to compare this to Yishmael, right, hang on one second, even if you want to compare this to Yishmael, right, what happens? God says to Avram, right, Yishmael, sorry, he's no longer allowed in the household. So what does Avram do? Sells him into slavery. No, of course he doesn't sell him into slavery. Right, what does he do? He gives them some bread, and he gives them some water, and he points them in the direction of Egypt, which is Hagar's hometown, and he and his mother set off to a place where they can find employment and sustenance. right? He doesn't sell them down the river, right? That's not the way you treat somebody, right? To go from Yaakov's favorite son, his presumptive firstborn, to brought down in chains, thrown into a pit, left to die, right? That's a pretty extreme change, all because you told people about this dream. I mean, wow. That's a pretty remarkable change that happens awful quickly. So Reb Meidan, who's now Rosh Yeshivat, Yeshivat Har Etzion, published a rejoinder, right, listing all these points, and his response is, what's going on is actually sort of a combination of what Karen and Naomi were suggesting, which is, what's going on is that fundamentally, this is about the teshuvah process. Yosef realizes that his brothers have made a terrible error in judgment, and he wants to give them an opportunity to redeem themselves. But what's going to happen if he sends a message to his father saying, hey, do you know what the brothers did? They threw me into a pit, they left me to die, they sold me into slavery, right? What's Yaakov going to do?
Disown the brothers.
He's going to disown them, right? He's going to rip Bnei Yisrael apart, right? He's going to leave them to the wind, right? He knows that that's not the way things can go. So what does Yosef do, right? And the dreams may play a role in that also. But what does Yosef do? He creates this elaborate system wherein they have a chance to repent. So what does he do? He says, you're all a bunch of spies, and I want you to bring down Binyamin, right, the last of the brothers, right, that way all the dreams can actually come true. And he hears them, right, at first he says, I'm taking all of you hostage, and he hears, and I'm going to send one back, and he hears them saying, oh, this is all our fault because we didn't listen to our brother's cries, right, when he was at the pit, and we didn't have mercy on him. And Reuven goes and says, I told you so, you should have listened to me, didn't I tell you not to do this? And then Yosef sort of changes his mind, and instead of keeping everyone hostage and sending one back, he keeps one hostage and sends everyone else back. Who's the one he keeps?
Son.
It's Shimon. Why does he keep Shimon?
Because
Shimon volunteered to say
Because if, right, the brothers made the decision to throw him in the pit, presumably, if you had no other information, who was the ringleader? It was probably Reuven. Except, Reuven just said, I told you not to do it. So, who must be the ringleader? Shimon must have been the ringleader. Okay, so, what does he do? Shimon, you're going to be held hostage. Right, everybody else, you can go back to your father. What happens? Right, they come back, and they bring Binyamin. He inquires of Binyamin. Binyamin seems fine. He seems unhurt. Right, but, right, he needs to know, right, if they have the opportunity to finish off the children of Rachel once and for all, are they going to do it? Right? Because that's what all this came from. He was being favored. The children of Rachel are being favored over the children of Leah. It's an insult to the memory of their mother. It's unclear if Leah has actually passed on this point, but since Yosef is referred to as B'nai Bilha B'nai upon Nishei Aviv, it seems likely, okay? Right? Certainly an insult to their mother, possibly even to the memory of their mother. So he wants to know, have they grown up? Have they matured? Have they sufficiently regretted this, not just verbally, not just instinctively, but has it actually affected their actions? So he plants the cup on Binyamin, and he wants to know, basically, are they going to abandon Binyamin to his fate? And what's the answer?
No.
No. They come back, they offer their lives, all in place of Binyamin. They give this speech about how terrible it'll be for Binyamin, for their father, and how, right, you have to let him go, and if you have to take our lives and our possessions and everything in his place, then do that. And Yosef realized they have now done a teshuvah, and so the family can come back together again. Yes?
But I don't think they have done teshuvah totally.
Okay, why not?
They explained to Yosef what they did, not knowing that it was Yosef, by shredding. They told a lie to Yosef. They didn't tell him the truth, saying, oh, this is what we did to our brother. We put him in a pit. We sold him. They told him that he got eaten and mauled by some animals, and they brought back the coat of many colors.
Right, they don't tell Yosef that. They tell the Egyptian man that. right? They don't know it's Yosef, right? And they're not going to say to this random Egyptian man. So, but I think the main thrust of it is...
Oh, so Yosef overhears them telling them.
Right, Yosef overhears them saying that, and they don't think Yosef can understand them because prior to this point, they've always had a translator between them. They don't think he understands Hebrew. Yes?
Why do they have to tell him that they had another brother that is gone?
Well, at this point, they've already said it, right? They said it all the way from the beginning. Right? Ha'achad einenu.
Yeah,
right?
why
that has been their story from the very beginning. They've been fairly truthful and honest.
Telling the truth. If
Right, they're telling the truth.
Start lying, then you have to remember what you said.
I think that's exactly right.
He's got to get Benjamin down. He's got to get Benjamin down there. And so the only way is
Rav Ben Nun actually responded to Rav Meidan's article, right? And he pointed out his objections, right? This requires a massive amount of both foresight and, saintliness, honestly, on the part of Yosef, right? Basically, you're saying there was this 17-year-old kid who was thrown into a pit by his brothers and sold out into slavery, and his immediate reaction was, I can't tell my father, my brothers will get into trouble. Woo! I mean, Yosef HaTzadik, right? He is a tzaddik. And that is about as tzaddik as you can get, right? So, but you could actually have a response to that, and basically the response could actually be the dreams, right? Yosef knows he's going to be a leader. He's going to be a leader of Bnei Yisrael. It's just a question of when or how it's going to happen, and he doesn't want to tear everything apart, right? He wants to happen organically. He needs everything to come together. Okay, but also points out Rav Ben Nun, if that's the case, right? If the whole point is he wants to see if they'll do tshuva, then as soon as they return with Binyamin and say, even though the cup was found with him, still, right, we will want him to go free and you can have our lives. At that point, they've done their teshuvah, right? Yehuda's speech doesn't add anything. So he should have revealed his identity at that point. But no, it's Yehuda's speech that drives him to reveal himself to his brothers who he truly is. So, says Rav Ben Nun, why is it this speech that does it if it's all an issue of teshuvah? So they go back and forth on these ideas. So we're going to do one more approach, right? Just because, 6 approaches isn't enough, right? You got to do 7. We're good Jews here. And then we're going to talk a little bit about a possible inverse of this question. So for those of you who like a sort of darker approach, there is one other possibility, which is, why is it that Yosef doesn't contact his father? Because, and Zippy sort of touched on it earlier in terms of the Egyptians might be out to get them, but I would say it's a different issue.
His brothers might still be out to get him?
Exactly, right? Yosef is very worried if he sends a message to his father saying where he is, that he's still alive, that message might get intercepted, or the brothers might find out about it, and they will react very, very badly. Why might Yosef think a message sent to his father might get intercepted by the brothers and they would react very, very badly?
Because his father's an old man, and there's always an intermediate.
Okay, but it's not just a theoretical possibility. Why might Yosef think that a message sent to his father might get intercepted and the brothers would react very badly or violently?
They already tried. Yeah. They might finish the job.
The whole
That's exactly what happened before. Right, what happens in the story of Shvan? They send a message to Yaakov saying, let's make a peace treaty. You'll marry us, we'll marry you, everything will be peachy keen. The message gets overheard by the brothers. What Yaakov is waiting for the brothers, and while Yaakov's waiting for the brothers go and murder everybody. Right? Yosef has reason to think this may very well be a problem. And remember, why are they acting so badly towards him? Because it's the Bnei Leah against the Bnei Rachel. What's his concern if they find out that he's still alive? One possibility is they'll be coming for him, but the other they'll be coming for Binyamin. Which is why, when he sees the brothers are there, he remembers the dreams, he remembers everything that happened back in his father's house. What's his immediate concern? You have to bring down Binyamin. You can all starve to death. I don't care. I want to see Binyamin. I want to make sure that he is unharmed. I want to make sure he's unscathed. Why? Because he doesn't know what happened after he left. He knows the brothers acted this way towards him, and now Binyamin is left all alone. Right? He doesn't have any brothers, he doesn't have any supporters, and he's surrounded by these people who just took Yosef and threw him into a pit and sold him into slavery.
But why wasn't he worried about Binyamin this whole time?
He is worried about him, but he thinks, look, there's 2 possibilities. Either they did something to Binyamin or they didn't. Right? If they did something to Binyamin, there's nothing I can do about it at this point. And if they didn't do something about Binyamin, it's because they think he's not a threat. Right? Yosef was the threat, and Yosef is gone. Yosef is dead, or Yosef is sold into slavery, never to be heard from again. And if he sends a message saying, I'm in the house of Potiphar, and I'm this very important person, what might happen if the brothers are still mad about it? They might come down to Egypt and do something to Yosef, and they certainly might say, oh, now all of a sudden, right, this is a threat again. They might do something with Binyamin.
How could they do anything to him? He's second to Pharaoh.
At that point, he's second to Pharaoh.
Even at Potiphar's house.
But so you can argue. I mean, it's not like there's a shortage of instances in history where leaders have been assassinated, but that's neither here nor there. My argument is not primarily Yosef's concern for his own safety, but rather for the safety of Binyamin, who has no protector. Right? Okay. We've actually reached our time limit, but there is one other point which is delicious and juicy, so I can't help myself, right? The inverse of our question, right? We've asked, why is it that Yosef does not go and contact Yaakov, and we spent a lot of time talking about it, but what we haven't talked about at all is, why doesn't Yaakov go looking for Yosef? And you might say, what do you mean, right? They showed him a bloody coat, and he said he was torn by a wild animal. Okay, everybody put yourselves, God forbid, in such a position, right? Your beloved favorite child, or your child, right, goes off, doesn't come back. The police come knocking at the door saying, is this the coat of your child? Right, they bring you a bloody coat. Yes, this is my child's bloodied coat. Okay, well, that's it. We're done now. I guess that's it.
Where's the body?
Well, at the very, very least, even if you absolutely believed, without any doubt, that they were dead and been torn by animals, right, what would you do?
Look for the
You would want to give the body decent burial, right?
Why didn't he?
Why doesn't Yaakov? He just says, oh, Yosef, I've seen this bloody coat. Yosef must be dead. There's no other explanation. There's no point in going and searching. Let's just stay here and mourn.
Nobody left.
This is pressing it, pushing it. Not that I think this is like a perfect answer, but he wasn't exactly in the shape to go and like start a search party. And given the circumstances of Yosef's disappearance, he didn't exactly trust the brothers to go looking for him. Right?
Maybe, maybe not. In other words, if he suspects that the brothers did something, right, which he may well have done, right, he certainly has plenty of other servants at his disposal. He certainly has other ways of doing it that don't involve the brothers. And, there's no real indication that Yaakov is significantly slowed by age at this point. He's certainly older, but there's no indication that he wouldn't be, when he sees Yosef is in Egypt, he picks up and he takes that journey, and that's decades later.
What makes you think that he didn't send out to look for the body?
So I want
it may not be mentioned, but it would be a natural thing to do.
So that's a possibility. I want to actually argue, right? I want to argue something. I haven't seen this anywhere. So take all this with a, Lot wife-sized grain of salt. But let us try and answer this question in the good Jewish way by asking a few more questions, right? So I'd like to ask a few more questions. First of which is, right, going back to our story, there's some very weird things that don't make sense. First of all, why is it that when Yaakov sees this bloody torn coat, he doesn't go searching for Yosef? Second of all, right, Yaakov loves Yosef, he's his beloved child, etc. What does he do? He says, why don't you go and start searching for your brothers in Shechem? Shechem. They hate him in Shechem. They murdered everybody. They had to run away from Shechem because he said, the anger and the fury of the people will be upon us and they'll come and hunt us down. And he sends Yosef there alone, by himself.
Well, that whole bit.
With the brightly colored
He
coat.
got sent alone, and Abraham sent Hagar and Ishmael out alone.
Oh, but hang on a second.
With a half dozen camels and a dozen men, they would have been safe. They would have made it to Egypt.
Hagar and Ishmael have something way better than half a dozen men and camels.
Promise.
They have a promise from God. God tells Avram, Hagar and Ishmael are going to be fine. They're going to be a great nation. Avram's done, right? Hashem said they're going to be a great nation.
That doesn't mean you don't go buy a lottery ticket so it makes it easy for God to make you rich.
But what else did God say? What else did God say? This isn't an issue of Ein Som Chalanes. If God had just left it at that, I'm sure, Avram would have been happy to give them camels and men. But what does Avram say? What does God say? God says, listen to Sarah. Do what Sarah told him to do. What did Sarah say? Kick them out. Kick them out with nothing. Right? So Avram is constrained by God's word.
Torah,
right?
God told told Yaakov to send Yosef
Right.
to
It never
Shechem.
says,
Don't
God
worry,
said,
I will
don't go
protect
looking for Yosef. It never says that. So, why is he sending him to Shechem, which is alone, which is this obviously dangerous area? Why is it he doesn't go looking for Yosef afterwards? And we can toss in a couple of other questions, right, that might bother us, right? Going back to the story of Dinah, right, the story in Shechem itself, right? What happens? Shimon and Levi go and massacre everybody. And so our question is, why are Shimon and Levi massacring everybody? And that's really two questions. Right, first of all, why are Shimon and Levi massacring everybody? Holy cow, that's a crazy reaction. And second of all, why are Shimon and Levi massacring everybody? Right? They don't have any characteristics outside of this story. We never see them do or say anything outside of this story, right? You would expect if there's going to be some action that's taken by leadership, it would be Reuven, it would be Yehuda, right? Why on Shimon and Levi? Where's that coming from? One final question, right? Because you got to ask 4 questions, right? We're good Jews, right? We have a very weird set of psukim in the end after the story of Yaakov and Esav concludes, right? Yaakov and Esav meet up again after all these years, and they hug and kiss, and they have their exchange. What happens? We're told, this is the bottom of page 178. We're told, beginning in verse 17, the Yaakov nasa Sukkota, right? Yaakov travels to Sukkot. Vayiven lo bayit, he builds a house, right? We talked about this, right? No longer nomadic, they build a house. Ulemiknehu asa Sukkot, and he builds pens for his animals. Al kain kara shema makom Sukkot, so to the point where they name the place Sukkot. So Yaakov goes, and he builds a house, and he's got his cattle, and everything is great. Remember, Yaakov always wanted a house. He's always lived in tents, but he always wanted the house, right? When he flees, he talks about fleeing Beit Avi, he names the place Beit El, right? He's always talking about a bayit, but he's always the Ishtam Yoshevo Alim. He always has to, live in the Yohel, following the sheep around in the wilderness. It's never what he wants to do, but he's forced to do it. And finally, his journey is over, he gets to live in a house. Except, what do we find immediately after that? Vayavo Yaakov Shalem Ir Shechem. Yaakov comes to Shalem, the city of Shechem, Asher Be'eretz Canaan, which is in Canaan, Bivao mi Padan Aram, when he comes from Padan Aram. Vayichan et Pnei Ha'ir, and he faces the city. Vayikan et Chalkat HaSadeh Asher Natasham Ahalo, and he buys the portion of the field where he pitches his tent from Hamor, the father of Shechem, for 100 keshita. And he builds an altar, and he cries in the name of God, the God of Yisrael. What's going on? He had his house. He was in Sukkot. He had his house. He built his fence. All of a sudden, he's going to Shechem. He's buying a portion of a field so he has a place to pitch his tent. He's going back to a tent. He's building an altar, calling out. What on earth is going on? Yaakov was all settled. Why is he going to this new spot now? So, I think we can answer all of our questions with one answer. Again, I've never seen this anywhere, so it could very well be untrue. Maybe it doesn't make sense, but I like it, and I'm happy to take any and all objections. But I think maybe our solution to all these problems is Ein mukdam u'me'uchar b'Torah. We have a situation where the stories are not being told in order. Now, to be clear, right, because this is a principle which often gets misunderstood. Some people think, there's this debate. Yesh mukdam u'me'uchar b'Torah, ein mukdam u'me'uchar Torah. The Torah is in order, the Torah isn't in order. That is not the debate. Everyone agrees that generally speaking, the Torah is in order. Right? Nobody thinks that Yitzchak came before Abraham or that Moshe came before Adam. Right? Generally speaking, the Torah is in order. And everybody agrees that on certain occasions, the Torah is not written in order. Right? For example, we are told, just in our situation, we're told about Yehuda, we're told Yosef is in the pit and the Midianim take him. Then we're told a story about Yehuda getting married, having kids, having grandkids. We learn about Yehuda's grandkids being born, and then we're told Yosef gets sold to Potiphar. Clearly, Yosef in Potiphar's house happens significantly before Yehuda has grandchildren, and yet, right, it's not in the order. The question is, do you have stories out of order frequently to teach a moral lesson, or no, do you only have stories out of order on rare occasions because it's absolutely necessary? That's the question. What I'm proposing is these stories are out of order for a very important reason, because we want the story of Yosef to be interrupted. But in reality, the story of Dinah and Shechem actually takes place after the sale of Yosef. If we assume this to be true, everything makes perfect sense. Why is it that Yaakov sent Yosef to go to Shechem? Why not? Nothing bad happened there. It's perfectly fine. They're good buddies with the people in Shechem. Why is it that Shimon and Levi, right? Why is it that Yaakov doesn't go looking for Yosef? He does go looking for Yosef. He's living in a house in Sukkot. His animals are all set up. Everything is great. And then what does he do apropos of nothing? He picks up and moves to Shechem. He goes back to a tent, and he goes to Shechem, and he pitches his tent there. Why? Because that's the last known place where Yosef was, and he's looking for Yosef, or at the very least, he's looking for Yosef's body. What happens, right? He needs to talk to people. He needs to attract people to him. So what does he do? What's a very good way to bring... He builds an altar, right? He calls out in the name of God. A, he's bringing people to him, and B, he's praying to God. He's asking for God's help, because he goes to Shechem, he asks around, nobody knows, nobody's seen these brothers, nobody's seen this Yosef, nobody knows what he's talking about. So what's left? If they don't know, he's crying out to God, he's seeking help, divine help, anything he can get. Finally, why is it that Shimon and Levi react so badly when it comes to the story of Dinah, when it comes to the story of Shechem? Because last time, right, remember, all the brothers deeply regret what happened with Yosef. We know that for a fact. They're crying about it. They're upset about it. They offer their lives to try and repent for it, because they didn't put themselves on the line when their brother was in trouble. They were responsible for their sibling being in bad trouble. Now, if you were going to hand out grades on the Yosef story, so no one's getting an A, but, right, Reuven, what grade do you give him? Does he get an F? No. Well, you can kind of give, right? What happens? He's the one who prevents them from killing him. Yeah. And he says, let's throw him in the pit. Why? Because he wants them to languish in the pit? No.
He was going to go
back and rescue him. Right? Yeah. Reuven is acting fairly honorably. He's doing the best he can with what he's got. Right? It's not a great, he hasn't been dealt a great hand, but he's doing the best he can. What about Yehuda? Does Yehuda get at least some merit badge here? Right? What does he do? He says, let's not let him die. Let's sell him into slavery. Right? Again, selling your brother into slavery is not great. Right? You're not going to win Brother of the Year award for that. But the alternative is him slowly starving to death in a pit in the middle of the wilderness. What about like Zevulun or Naphtali or what about those brothers? Well,
know about them.
Right, we don't know, but what we do know about them are, right, they're not the important brothers, right? They're the sons of concubines. Their voices don't necessarily matter too much, and they're also much younger, right? They're not much older than Yosef. They're 18, they're 19. Who gets the big fat F? Shimon and Levi. They're the oldest, other than Reuben, who's acted honorably. They're children of Leah. They're not concubines. They're in leadership roles, and they fail miserably. They're the ones who really leave Yosef to his fate. And they're bearing this guilt because their sibling was in trouble, and they should have rescued their sibling, and they did nothing about it. And what happens? They receive word from the field that their sibling is in trouble. And what do? They hypercorrect. Right? They go off the deep end in the opposite direction. They assume the worst. They assume that everybody's murderous and traitorous. Why? That's kind of the way they acted. And so they go and they dispatch with all of their horrible enemies who have done this horrible thing to their sibling. Because
they didn't do it before.
They didn't do it before. So hopefully, right, and again, like I said, I haven't seen that anywhere. It's my own little thought. So if people have any objections, I'm happy to discuss them. And with that, we can go off the record.